The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Academic Entrepreneurs, an Entrepreneur's Life, Creating, Developing, and Funding Startups in a University Setting. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This webinar series is part of a new book that Bob Hisrick, one of our speakers today, is creating with NCED2's Executive Director, Tony Stanko, and that book is on creating an ecosystem for academic entrepreneurship. So we are featuring some of the more prominent academic entrepreneurs in this webinar series. It's basically to provide exposure not just to the academic entrepreneurs in the company, but also the university. This book also aims to highlight the important work that academic entrepreneurs perform for the regional and global economies. So for those on the call who have submitted profiles of academic entrepreneurs for the book, thank you very much for sending us your profiles, and we'll make sure to let you know if any of those profiles would be considered for the book. And also, since I'm talking to academic entrepreneurs here, if you have a startup that is still existing, we are opening up, or we've opened up submissions for companies for funding for the National Angels and the Autumn Pitch and Play Startup Showcase at the next Autumn National Conference. It's going to be on February 10 to 14, 2019 in Austin, Texas. If you have a startup that you would like to be considered for the showcase, email your startup pitch deck to submissions@nced2.org. After the webinar today, or after the presentation part, we will have Q&A at the end. So if you look at the questions box or your GoToWebinar control panel, you should see a questions box there where you could enter your questions to the staff. And we are looking forward to answering your questions. We'll try to get to as many of it as we can. However, if we don't get to your question, please feel free to email us, and I'll send you that email address in the chat box as well. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have colleagues that were unable to make the live session, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. An email will be sent to you once that video is up, so just look out for it. All right, so now to our speakers and our speaker and our moderator for today. So today's featured academic entrepreneur is Dr. Michael Schutlz. He is Chief Scientific Officer of Viewpoint Molecular Targeting. He's also an Associate Professor of Radiology at the University of Iowa. And today's session is moderated by Dr. Bob Hisrick. He is a Bridgestone Professor of International Marketing, as well as Associate Dean of Graduate and International Programs of the College of Business of Kent State University. So Bob, Michael, welcome both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rhea. It's really good to be here. And Michael, I'm really glad that we have this chance to discuss this whole process of being an academic entrepreneur and to give some information so people can understand what you've been through. So why don't we start off with, if you don't mind, just giving us a little idea of why did you think about becoming an academic entrepreneur?
Well, first of all, thanks to Rhea, and thanks to you and everyone for the opportunity to contribute. So my journey, from academics to entrepreneurship, I think really started with maybe similar to lots of other academics who are really thinking about how they're going to make the biggest impact that they can make based on the science and the academic discoveries that came out of their laboratory. And so and the journey really started back in, I think, 2011, and it started not atypically, I suppose, with an elevator pitch at the University of Iowa that was put on by the Office for the Vice President for Research and our University of Iowa Research Foundation, and I won, and I was really excited about the idea, and that sort of began a journey that not only included, a series of small business innovation research grants that you see on this slide that I have in front of you, but also a number of elevator pitch competitions and learning experiences that the university helped us with along the way. And I'll talk about those more later on in this conversation. But this journey for me from academic to entrepreneur is something that there's a lot of thought that went into that. I think it's probably something that if you're an academic entrepreneur, or if you're thinking about doing this, or if you're a university tech transfer office, there's some conflicting or there's some ambivalence about the idea of mixing academics and entrepreneurship, and really, if you really think about it, there's a big difference, So entrepreneurship is really all about financial risks and in the hope of profit, right? And that that sort of concept is really, for me anyway, is in some ways sort of diametrically opposed. I look at it like maybe I'm never really an academic or really an entrepreneur at the same time. And this slide kind of gives this idea of what is academics all about. And it's really about education and teaching, scholarship. I'm not sure that it's really true that there's that it's not a practical relevance, but it's certainly theoretical, and it's about teaching and scholarship. And in thinking about this, this, as I sort of went down this road towards starting a company, and this slide kind of gives you a picture of the traditional academic research enterprise, right? So the important parts of that, the cornerstones of that, are service, for example. This is where you're creating internal and community relationships with people and with colleagues and people that are going to help you, that are going to help you to build your academic research enterprise. But you're also working to weave yourself into the fabric of your field through service and scholarly activities. Those are papers and publications, and giving presentations nationally, internationally, to try to work towards raising the level of notoriety of the research that you're working on. And then teaching. So this is about strengthening your your communication skills. It's about mentoring your graduate students and preparing them to take their leadership roles and build their academic research enterprise. And what really happened to me along the way is that I started to look at industry interactions as a way for me to focus my research more on what the specific needs were in industry, and my business is in radiopharmaceutical sciences, so and radionuclide therapy for cancer, right? So really working on trying to understand what is really needed in that business to take care of patients. And of course, then the question that kept coming up in my mind is, if I was really going to have the kind of impact that I wanted to have, was a startup company something that I was going to need to do in order to push my ideas into the commercial market space. And I really started to think about this in working with the Technology Transfer Office, that the reality is that for the ideas that I had academically to be, commercially relevant and to have real impact, that I was some form of entrepreneurship was going to be needed. And that really that's really where the transition started to take place, this realization that was going to be necessary.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And I think hard for a lot of people, including myself, when I started my first company, to really come to grips with this sort of tension between the scholarly activities and research and publications and teaching and starting a company. Is there anything that you can think of in your experience that might have really assisted you in making that transition?
I think that's a great question. And, you know, along the way, I talked about this as sort of a, you know, I was developing this commercial edge to my research, you know, and, you know, the journey there, you know, was kind of a, I had some ambivalence along those lines, you know, the academic promotion and tenure doesn't include a commercial edge necessarily, although it's encouraged. Funding from outside resources of any kind are encouraged, but you know, there isn't a real promotion and tenure kind of driver within the academic system. It may be changing at some universities, and I think that there is some changing to the thought, you know, to the thoughts about how technology transfer and commercialization and licensing and startup companies could fit into the promotion and tenure package, but certainly there was some ambivalence about it from that perspective. And then, you know, then secondly, you know, as an academic, you know, this idea of return on investment and purely commercial products and sales and marketing was something that, you know, that I had some ambivalence about getting involved with from purely a personal perspective. But you know, along the way, the thing that really drove me to, I think, taking the leap into academics was taking the leap from academics into this, you know, entrepreneurial activities was really about the impact that I thought I could have in taking some discoveries that were really promising in my laboratory, and I really felt like I was going to need to, at least, you know, from the beginning, I really felt like I was going to need to take those, I was going to have to take that to a level where the product was de-risked enough so that a larger organization or maybe my own organization, you know, would have to build into a company that could make it available. And that was some discoveries that we made in metastatic melanoma. And so I had a purely academic grant where I worked on developing understanding of metastatic melanoma as a cancer and tumor cell biology of metastatic melanoma. It was actually a training grant. It was a K-25 very mentored training career research development award. But we made some discoveries along the way. And metastatic melanoma, if you're not familiar with it, is a cancer of the skin. The good news for these patients is that if it's caught early, it can be cured by surgery. But you know, if it spreads to other parts of the body and becomes metastatic, then it's a really difficult disease to treat. And we made some discoveries of some new approaches to the treatment of metastatic melanoma. And this slide, you know, is sort of a high-level interpretation of what that technology is really all about that we developed along those lines. And this was this idea of a theranostic agent. So we developed molecules that would bind specifically to cancer cells, and they won't bind to normal cells, and so we can deliver radiation precisely to those cells. And the lead product of the company is this VMT01, but we also have a list of products that we can that can roll out in the pipeline that are based on some of the platforms that we developed. And just to go through a little bit about the technology. So the idea here is I really divide this theranostic into three basic parts. So there's a target. This is a cancer cell surface protein that's expressed in cancer cells but not in normal cells. And then number two, we have this ligand, and then we attach a radiation cage that we call it a chelator to that ligand, and that allows us to direct radiation not only in the diagnostic sense for this theranostic compound. We can deliver diagnostic radiation to give us information about the patients that would benefit from the administration of the therapeutic, which emits alpha and beta particles, and these are delivered directly to cancer cells. And those particle emissions will then kill the tumors. And so this is very unusual for a cancer therapeutic. It's not unusual for a cancer therapeutic for the physician to not necessarily have a clear understanding about which patients will respond, but in this case, we can select patients using an imaging scan that would be positive for the target, and they can be selected, and the patient therapy then can be optimized. And so just to kind of give you an idea about how this works in the clinic, the patient would present with symptoms. The patient is injected with the diagnostic form of the drug. Then this medical scan is performed, and patients that are tested positive are given the therapeutic, and then in the end, a response can be monitored with the diagnostic form of the drug. So why did we really, the sort of the journey for taking me from, academic investigator to entrepreneurship is it started out with funding for the research, but then we started to really realize that we could have a significant clinical impact, and that started to get really exciting, and it's certainly a challenging thing, and the potential for profit is another reason I think that the academic entrepreneurial activities were something that I decided to pursue.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Bob. Could you turn on your webcam, please? I apologize. I think it got disconnected.
Well, I don't like that. So did I turn it on?
There you go. It's on now. There you are.
Oh, good. I'm probably better off not in the webcam, Rhea, but thanks for including me. Mike, that's really fascinating. I think the nice thing that you're talking about is the fact that you can do research and come up with something and then really do good with that, because the people that have that cancer, if they can be treated better and more effectively and have better lives, that's what it really is all about. But tell me, to switch gears a little bit, how did the technology transfer office at your university assist you in this in any way, or what happened there?
So that's a great question, and as I mentioned, you're a freight train trying to leave the station as a startup company moving from academic research and working to try and commercialize something. So you do need a lot of help along the way. And the things that I think about where the university, the big contributions that were really important along the way, seed funding was one. So the university had several programs that we took advantage of along the way for seed funds in the, say $25,000 to $50,000 range that helped us to do some key experiments along the way that would, say, for example, get us ready to be able to start submitting small business innovation research grants. Another thing that was really, I think, was really helpful, and I didn't really realize how helpful it was until now we're at that stage where we're going out and we're pitching the company to investors, seed investors, venture capital types, as well as investment bankers, and all of those investors have a different way of thinking about how their investment, what their payback is going to be, and how the company would be structured along those lines. But the pitch competitions that the university puts on every year are important, and they really get you ready to be able to make those kinds of presentations when they're really going to be important later with the company. And the other thing that's really important about that is that the money at that stage doesn't necessarily have to be that big to have a big impact. So I like to say that from a university tech transfer office, $5,000 to $10,000 to help a company to be able to go out and recruit key talent, or be able to go out and travel and make some pitches to some potential investors is really an important thing. Another thing that the University of Iowa did for us was what I call a mini National Science Foundation I-Corps program that was called Faculty Innovators. And so this was an introduction to this idea of really getting out of the building and going out and talking to people to test your business assumptions. And as academics, I think that we made, at least myself anyway, I can say you have kind of the idea that you're going to be able to get all the information that you need by reading papers and consuming content. And that is, how you're going to form your company around the assumptions that you build that way. But it's really important to get out of the building and go talk to other people. So we have a radically different company today than we had when we started, and a lot of that had to do with this faculty innovators program that we went through, and then using using that to make an application to go through the National Cancer Institute's I-Corps program. That really, I think, took us from a very technical academic company to a company that had a better understanding of what it needed to do as a business to be successful. And,
Mike, before you get off that, I think that's really a critical point you made, that getting an idea of what the market is talking about versus just what the science is, and that's really that to me is a really significant point for everyone to understand. So can you flesh that out a little bit more, and how that happened and some goods and bads that came out of that?
Wow. So well, as I mentioned, we participated in the Faculty Innovators program, which I called a mini I-Corps. And that was this introduction to building a list of assumptions about your product and who your customers are, and then taking a deep dive into different aspects of your assumptions. So thinking about who precisely is the person that is going to be purchasing your product. For example, if you have a cancer therapeutic, will it be the medical oncologist that's taking care of cancer patients? If you have an adjuvant radiopharmaceutical therapy, will the customer really be a referred nuclear medicine physician, or will the medical oncologist actually prescribe the drug? Who would be, how does the payment flow of that ecosystem then help you to determine what type of company that you would be as far as your manufacturing and distribution of the product? Would it be better to distribute a kit that is manufactured on site at the clinic? All of these questions and assumptions that we had can only really effectively be tested by going and talking to the people at institutions, and not just your local institutions. So we found that there were big differences between the way that a radiopharmaceutical drug like we have would be purchased depending upon what institution you're in. And so whatever your decisions about what your product really is can change radically based on these types of customer discovery interviews. So we did more than 100 interviews with people from medical clinics and institutions from the West Coast to the East Coast of the United States, and even in Australia and Europe, to develop a more detailed understanding, test those business assumptions. And that helped us to, number one, it helped us to decide to focus our attention on our lead compound for the time that it was in the clinical setting, and save some of our other potential pipeline products for later, and develop a better production and distribution network that would make us ready to be able to conduct multi-site phase 2 clinical trials when the time was right. And from our conversations with people in the pharmaceutical business and in medicine across the country, we learned these were key learnings that happened, and they really would not have happened without those personal interviews. So I highly recommend that approach to other academic entrepreneurs that are out there. And the Faculty Innovators program is a great way at the university level to introduce these concepts to startup companies, and I think that can really add a lot of benefit.
Yeah, that's really great advice, Mike, because I have found the same thing, that once you really have to understand what the customer wants, and then what path that means in terms of your products and services and what you're going to do with it. So thanks for adding that in and fleshing that out, because I think that is a very valuable key to becoming a successful academic entrepreneur. So tell us a little bit about how they helped you with your intellectual property.
Well, this is a big, this is another big thing that the university helps with, and they help in several ways. So on the one hand, they'll when you have a disclosure, they have people that would do that sort of initial test to look for prior art in the literature and in the patent literature. So that helps you to decide whether or not it's something that can potentially be protected. And then at the next level, they help you to put together those all-important provisional applications and follow-ups on those to make sure that you are, that you're appropriately following up on the provisional and as well as issued patents at the at the time when they need to be followed up on. And that that interaction that you have with them helps you to develop a better understanding about what other key IP might need to be developed, where you might want to be building some fences to shield you from the potential for other IP to get to gain access to the space that you're targeting for your product. The other big thing that they do for you, or at the University of Iowa, was they helped us with the cost of that at the beginning, so that we at the time when we're starting the company and there's not a lot of cash, making the initial standstill agreement with the university to help us to pay for that during that critical startup period where you're just really trying to get liftoff is really that's an important thing that universities can help startups with. And then and then in the end, in the licensing, the University of Iowa was really terrific about the terms, and it was really clear that they were looking for a win-win, and they were recognizing that we were going to be going out and talking to investors, and they understood that the terms had to be something that would be acceptable at the next level too. So there was some foresight there that I think was really valuable.
Yeah, I think you're really fortunate, Mike. I've just heard so many stories from other academics that they didn't have that same kind of experience. So I think you were very fortunate to have your tech transfer office and the whole university really working with you in terms of commercialization of this. Do you have any advice you might think about if I'm an academic entrepreneur and I'm having trouble with that? Is there something you might suggest I could do to help move that along?
Well, I think that we've had some interactions with some other universities that haven't been quite as the terms haven't been quite as good, and in some ways I really didn't feel like they were looking out on the horizon as effectively. And the big thing is that I think if I have any advice to give to other academic entrepreneurs about this aspect of what they're going to be doing is first of all you really need to read all of the agreements from the very beginning. One thing that can happen is there can be some terms that you didn't notice because you didn't really carefully go through the documentation for the agreements from the beginning, and be prepared to have lots of constructive conversation about the goals that you have, and be prepared to have some ideas about some proposals about what you would like to see that could be different. And the other thing that I would do is you need to recruit. If you're not familiar with these types of agreements, I think that for us, we recruited somebody that from a local economic development corporation, the EDC in Cedar Rapids, which is near the university, that had lots of experience with this, and so they were able to help us to make some counter proposals that, eventually, as we work forward, turned into some great agreements. So I would say read things carefully, and if you're really not understanding what you're reading and what it might mean to your company at the next phase of development, right, as you're taking investment, then that's the time when you really need to recruit some talent that is going to be on your team to help you to be able to make some counter proposals to and move towards an agreement. So those would be the two big things that I would do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, Mike, because I think sometimes, we get so caught up in the science and what we're doing that we forget that there's some people out there that could really be an asset to us in terms of that have been through this before. And so that it's almost like a mentoring process they provide and giving us guidance, and that's really good advice. You've really been fortunate with your university, but if you reflect on everything that you've gone through and everything else, what would you recommend that your university or universities in general might do to help move this process along faster? Because everybody wins economically if it's done correctly.
Well, Bob, I really appreciate that last thought, because what you're really working for here is a win-win-win, right? So you want this to be a win for your potential customers, and the way that that's going to happen is if you are capitalized sufficiently to be able to move the product through whatever the regulatory strategy that you have. I'm in biomedical, so regulatory strategy is the important thing. You want your customers to win. You want the patients to win, and if those people are winning, in all likelihood, you're going to be winning, and the university is going to be winning. And so, there's a few things along the way that I think would speed the process. And I think one of them is the people that make up technology transfer offices, I think in many cases, in ours, are people that were in business or are still in business. And one thing that would be really helpful would be template agreements for all the different things that you're going to be needing along the way. Consultancy agreements help you to understand what are the appropriate terms. How should it be structured so that an appropriate set of milestones are the way that a person would maybe vest in your company, or how would they get paid, things like that. And we can, all of those things can be written and done, but I think it could go a lot faster if I think that the people in tech transfer offices could really, the academic entrepreneurs, I should say, could really benefit from some assistance with templates on things like that would help you to be able to move those kinds of agreements along more quickly. And then
that's something that maybe NSET 2 should do, because I think you're absolutely right, because if you have these templates, and they're almost all the same no matter what, terms change and a few things change, but the standard format's the same. And I'm sure that if you had an understanding of that going in, that whole process could have been much more easily gone through. Plus, it would be favorable for everyone.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing that can happen there, and this is the part that when you're inexperienced at putting those things together, and the people that you're talking with are a lot more experienced, and in general they may be, because you're looking for consultancy talent, for example, that can help you on a specific aspect of company development. So you're not in as good of a position to be able to do bargaining when you don't have a good understanding about what that agreement should really look like. And sometimes it can cause the potential for miscommunication. Sometimes you could potentially kind of offend someone because you really didn't understand what that type of agreement might be. So some experience there and some templates would definitely be something that I think would be could help the academic entrepreneur along.
Good. And I think you have a second point there too that would be helpful if I read your line here.
Absolutely, and it kind of it's in the same vein, and that's, we were fortunate to be working with the Economic Development Corporation in Cedar Rapids. It's a great organization that that's helped hundreds of companies. And I think the university transfer office definitely could. There's definitely people who are experienced in the structure of capitalization tables and how and help the academic entrepreneur to learn how to do a sensitivity analysis about how a specific structuring of a deal would change their perspective on whether or not a particular investment deal was a good one for the company and for the founders. So, for example, one thing that that one of my mentors, Nancy Kamei, who's also in a technology transfer office, the deal has to be worth it to you too as the founder. So, you have to recognize that there is going to be a significant amount of dilution that is going to go along with other people putting their money in your risky venture. And you have to come to terms with that. But the best way to come to terms with it is to learn how to do the math. And so in the beginning, the first set of personal interviews within the financial space with, potential investors, I personally didn't know what a capitalization table was. And and that certainly didn't reflect well with, albeit it was a limited number of investors before we realized that we needed to learn more about founders math. But you want to be able to have a conversation with people that are in that, that do that for a living, with some strength and understanding where you would be given what their likely goals are going to be for your company, whether they're seed angel type investor, or whether they're venture capital, or whether they're an investment banker. Each one of those types of institutions is going to have a different perspective on what that investment that they would make would be all about. And you want to be able to work on a capitalization table from each one of those perspectives in a way that's going to help you to understand, A, is an investment that they're talking about with you one that's going to be good for you and for the company, and a win-win, and well, I guess, and a win-win. So B, is it going to be a win for them? So I think that universities could definitely help startup companies with some training on some concrete sensitivity analysis, spreadsheet cap tables that could help them to understand what different types of investment meant to their dilution, and whether it might be a good idea to get another SBIR and do some key experiments first to try and build what your value proposition could be as your initial value.
Yeah, that's really, really, really great advice, because it's all about the value proposition going in terms of what the end result is in terms of the term sheets or the capitalization table. So we're going to address that in the book that we're working on, as well as other things. But well, I really appreciate you commenting on that, and I hope that people that are watching this webinar or will watch it understand how important that is, both the consumer input, understanding agreements, and then understanding various aspects of when money comes into the company and the dilution effect of that. Do you have a final comment you'd like to make before we turn it over to Ria for questions?
Wow, well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to talk. I think at any time you have an opportunity to talk about your journey as an academic to entrepreneurship and things that you've learned along the way to strengthen yourself as an academic entrepreneur. And so this has been a great opportunity for me. This has been a challenging thing that I would honestly, I'd recommend to anyone. Is a really exciting, departure from your academic career. And I think the one last thought that I would bring from, is that I would love to see universities, and I think the tech transfer office community could maybe help in this, is to make it part of the promotion and tenure professional development. I think that would be a great thing for universities. I think that would it would empower, it would inspire academics to take the necessary steps to take some great ideas and get them into the public space, and that would be I think a big contribution to that.
Well, great, Mike. I totally agree with you. I hope that is something that we see in the not too distant future, because I totally agree that would really empower academics to be all well-rounded, so you can still do research, still do your teaching, and yet you can still form a company, and all three are, I think, contribute greatly to your own development as well as to the university's development.
Right.
So we could talk all day, but we should answer some questions. So Ria, do you have any questions that we should address?
Yeah, I do. There are a few lined up here. All right, so the first question is, have you created companies before, or is Viewpoint your first company?
Good question.
Great question. So this Viewpoint is my first company, and that I like to say I tricked into joining the company to help me were people that had created companies before in molecular diagnostics and in radiochemistry. So I would say, I mean, the answer to the question, this is my first company, and the second part of that answer is, if you're going to do this, it's really a good idea to go out and try and recruit some talent that has some experience within your
I think Mike is breaking up a bit.
Next level now. Am I breaking up?
Yeah, you're back now. We can hear you now.
Oh, I'm back now. Okay, I apologize. I didn't move. But I would say it's an ongoing process to be seeking the talent that you need to get to the next level. So that's what I've learned along the way. But this is my first company.
Yeah, that's really good, Mike. And Ria, I might just add that one of the factors when we study successful entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs that's come out very strongly is that successful entrepreneurs and successful companies have someone in that company who has experience in the field of the business. And Mike did that by having these people talking to the market, and then also having people on his staff or consultancy that had that experience, and that's really important. So that's great comments for the audience.
Okay, here's our next question. Since you were talking about expertise, how did you find your team?
So that's another great question. And finding the right talent is something that is what we've adopted is a lot like the customer discovery process that we learned in the I-Corps, right? So we really go out and start talking to people about people. And for me, I happen to have some connections with people that, that were, in the case of our CEO, was somebody that was that I had worked for previously, who had sold his last company, so he was going to be available to be able to help us to build the nuts and bolts of the company. And so I would say, go out into your network and start available for us right now at this very early stage. That what do you think about them? You can use things like LinkedIn to do that, but I would say that you're better off to go out and really talk individually to people, watch their body language about when they're talking about people that they might think could fit this talent piece that you need, and you're more likely to find the right people by doing that. So I would say you have to get out of the building and go talk to people about it.
Yeah, and I think you're interesting, Mike, because you really understood the difference between, like when you said your CEO had a business perspective and experience, and you're the science part, and then when you have that combination that trusts each other, like obviously you found here by asking people and discussing things, that's really where you have a great team and one that's has a high probability of being successful.
Well, that's a great. I appreciate that, Bob. And our chief medical officer had experience in a startup that had gone through the multiple rounds of funding and recognized more about how the company could be built that way than than either one of the other two founders. So we really recruited a key core group of people that that had the right experience, and now we're on the next step. So we're searching out someone who's got more experience in the pharmaceutical business to lead the company to the next level. So it's a constant search for the right talent, and also recognizing, testing your assumptions, and recognizing what is the key thing that has to happen next for the company to grow, and using that to find talent that can help you with that specific thing. So it's a constant process, I would say.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's going to continue that way forever. And what's nice about it is that you can recognize when you don't have the talent you need to go to the next step, and then where is that talent located, and how do we acquire that to help us move to that next step? So that's great. Absolutely, I think all of us that have been through this many times, as I've been through it. We finally recognize that we just can't do everything, and we need people with different talents at different stages of the company's growth. So here we are, Ria, I know we need to move on. So our third question, here we are.
This was a really good follow-up question. At what point, I see that you're the CSO, so at what point did you hire a CEO or realize you needed a CEO to complement your technical expertise?
That's great follow-on question. So, I recognized as soon as I started to try to put together the documentation to formalize the company that I needed some help. And and so right at that moment is when I started searching through my personal Rolodex to think about who was the right person that I knew that might be able to help me with, that very early stage of the company, that somebody that I knew that I would be able to trust. And we chose our CEO based on his experience with radiochemistry, and he has a master's degree in nuclear physics from Duke and an MBA from Harvard. So it was somebody that had the right core experience, and I could talk to him about what it was that we're doing. But at the same time, he had built multiple companies, and the people that I knew that had worked for him loved him. And I had worked for him briefly as a consultant sometime years ago, and so that was it was a process of, he wasn't the only person that I talked to. And now as the company has developed, and so it wasn't the only person I talked to, so I talked to multiple people and made a decision based on that. And then now what we're recognizing is his expertise is not specific for the pharmaceutical business, and so we're searching for the right talent to help us get to the next level, and we're talking to people and interviewing people right now. So it's another one of those things where you really need to be prepared to spend some time on that to make sure that you select the right person and think through where the company is going to go and how that person is going to contribute as the company does that, and then come to terms on what that person's part of the company will be and what specifically you're expecting that person to take care of for you. So it's a very careful process of interviewing each other to make sure that you both understand that you're expecting that CEO is going to do the following things to get you to whatever that next level that the company is at. Maybe they can take you all the way to the end, but maybe you need that person just to help you with a specific part of the company development, and then maybe they can tell you, I won't be necessarily somebody that wants to be involved after this point because you're going to need somebody else. And so they could be an interim CEO, but then you want to have a different kind of arrangement within, when we talked earlier about that capitalization table, you want to have a different arrangement there. These are really key things when you're getting the company started, to make sure that you are thinking out over the horizon about who's going to do what when.
Yeah, great comments, Mike, because what's the saddest thing to me is when I want somebody that really has a great science and has a great idea for a company that can really be good to have that product on the marketplace, and then they don't understand the dilution effect that occurs as you go along. So that's really great. We could talk about that for another hour, but we'll move on to the next question. So Ria, you all set?
Yep. Here it is. Is it realistic for an academic entrepreneur to expect to keep 100% of their company? Example, not give out equity.
So, that's a great question. And that's a lot of times where a company starts from. And and I would say it depends. In the space that we're in pharmaceuticals, that's, not likely. So there's too much money that's going to be necessary to take the company from an academic idea to a commercial product. It's possible, I guess, in some cases that you might be able to bootstrap a company yourself. The Small Business Innovation Research Grant Program is one way that you might be able to do that. But remember, if people are investing capital into your company, they have to have a return on investment, and that is something that is, necessarily going to involve some piece of your company for them to get a return on their investment. As you build value in the company, their return on investment comes from that. And as I talked about earlier, different types of investors will have different views on what they would like the deal to look like. Some of them are looking for, a return on investment of some multiple over some period of time. Others are more interested in academic entrepreneurs that would like to build a company from the ground up that is going to be selling a commercial product. So, but in almost all of those cases, if someone else's money is going to be invested in your company, then it's not really realistic to expect that you're going to be able to keep 100%. In fact, you're going to be diluted by quite a bit. The more investment that comes in, the more that you're going to be diluted.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have what we call stage financing, and so the dilution occurs as you grow your company. But the end result is, I'm sure you come to the conclusion, Mike, is do I want a big piece of nothing or a small piece of something that's really significant? So, but it's tough. I mean, I still dread giving up equity, even though I've done it many times.
I really do too, Bob. But the reality is, and we've talked about this earlier, is that you have to learn what we call founder's math, right? That has to do with, what is the real potential value of the product that you are developing, and what are the investment dollars that are going to be necessary, and then a sensitivity analysis within a capitalization table that helps you to understand what's your dilution going to be. But if it's a big dilution and a huge exit by acquisition by a larger company, then you can model that within that capitalization table, and you have to make that decision. Is it worth it to you? And that's, so I would say, rather than think about how much equity I'm going to keep, it's better to do a sensitivity analysis about the types of investments that are going to be necessary, what those returns look like depending upon the aspect of the type of investor that's looking at you, and what you wind up with, at the end of that runway, whatever it is.
That's so true. And hopefully all of you that are on this webinar and will be on the webinar understand that, because once you understand that, you feel comfortable with it, and then you know that this money that you're going to have dilutes, but on the same token, without that, you can't get to the next stage. So very true. So this is our last question, Ria?
Yes, it's our last question. We have a few more queued up, but we're running out of time, so I guess this is the last one. Okay. We have tons of faculty doing research that has potential to hit the market in a variety of ways, but have a hard time getting them to tell us about all the exciting things they're doing. Do you have any suggestions on how we can bridge the gap to learn about what they're doing and help them get to the next level? This question is from a tech transfer office incubator point of view.
Wow. Okay, so that is a great question. So, as an academic, about my research. So an invitation that to talk about my research is something that I like to be able to do that. I think cash is something that could potentially get investigators to be interested in expanding their understanding about how their technology might, might turn into a commercial product and how that could fit in with their research enterprise. So pitch competitions are something that I think can attract investigators if there's some cash involved in that the investigator then can use as they see fit to work on the technology or a potential startup company. And I think that is one of those kinds of things that is probably going to be kind of time intensive. If you're a large organization and a small tech transfer office, it's going to take some effort on your part to go out and find venues in the in the university ecosystem for you to be able to get some airplay talking about what opportunities there might be for academics to be entrepreneurial. And that could come in the form of lectures to faculty conferences and seminars about the university technology transfer office. I know that at Iowa that from time to time they do lectures on intellectual property and protecting intellectual property that they're interested in. So I think it's likely going to be something that's going to need a real campaign to go out and recruit investigators and get them talking.
Mike, I really agree with all that. And I think one thing you mentioned previously comes into play here in this question is how can we help the researchers understand the market? Because once I think you get them involved with thinking about this research, this science becoming something that can be a marketable product, then that changes the whole view of this whole process. So, and you talked about that before, which I thought was really great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Bob, this is a hard question. This last question is a hard question. I think it's something that requires a campaign, a thoughtful campaign about how do we reach people. And it's going to be different depending on the ecosystem at the university that the office is at.
Very much so. Well, I've really enjoyed our time together, Mike, and I hope the others learned something from this. And so, Rhea, we'll turn it over to you to put the final comments in.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mike, for your time today. Really appreciate you guys doing this webinar. Again, the webinar is recorded, so everyone who's registered for this webinar series will get information as to when the video is up. And going forward, we do have a webinar next month, sometime in November. And as soon as that webinar has been organized and confirmed, we'll send out another announcement to the people who are registered, and hopefully you can join us then. All right. So thanks a lot, Bob. Thanks a lot, Mike, for your time, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.